Well, wow, that looks grand. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Horst Kuroda-san, for the invitation. I'm going to somehow survey the conventional wisdom about China's monetary history, particularly for the Ming-Qing period. I'm going to put forward my argument about why this is a demand-side story and what silver and Spanish-American silver has to do with this, and eventually how China's monetary history for the Daguan period has not much to do with silver as such, but with a coin made of silver. So traditionally or conventionally, China's monetary history is explained through this balance of trade model that assumes that silver is a commodity money, or takes silver as a commodity, and explains the monetary development as a result of the balance of trade, or the Chinese exports as silver is the return of Chinese silk, cotton, China, and so on. That has explained the silverization of China since the 16th century, and the desilverization of China by the 1830s. That is when, presumably, and according to European sources, this balance of trade inverted and became negative, usually associated with the drain of silver because of the opium imports, or more recently, this revisionist stance by Mang Huoling, because of the cessation of Spanish-American exports of silver to China. In any event, these interpretations are seriously biased. I wouldn't say Eurocentric, but center on the European information about China's commerce. Mang Huoling, in this very important book, China Upside Down, is a thesis at Harvard from earlier on. She argues quite convincingly that opium was not the problem. The problem is a supply side issue that by 1810, 1808, there is a significant reduction in the export of silver that China had drawn traditionally from, which were no longer available. Against that argument, Richard van Glagen and I, we argue that, following bit what Dennis had said for a previous period, there is a demand-side problem. The demand-side problem, I argue, is not the quantity of silver. There was plenty of silver available in the international economy, but the quality of the coins. Something which I developed in this article published in the Journal of World History in 2009. I would agree with Mang Huoling that about the timing, unlike the more traditional historians that date this in the 1820s and 30s with the inversion in the balance of trade. But I think that she misses the point about the causes of that. Richard has shown quite well in a couple of articles that the Chinese people were very aware of the differences in the quality of the coins and the characteristics of the coin since the 18th century. And there is a change, my argument, there is a change in the demand for silver that explains the cessation of the Chinese imports of silver. My point is that China doesn't want anymore, or doesn't want the new silver coins available in the international economy. That is, the coins minted in Republican Spanish America increasingly and incrementally since 1805, 8, 10, and thereafter. These coins, in all shapes, quality, and size, and appearances, were taken at discount in China. That made me think that to understand China's monetary history, we have to make a distinction between silver bullion and silver coin. And that is something that even Morse was aware of it, but didn't elaborate on that. Silver coins became a means of payment that is nothing to do with a commodity money. And as time goes by, inside China, they become a standard of value. I'm going to say very quickly here, for those that are not very familiar, this sort of idea of this bimetallic system. For official bookkeeping purposes, most of prices and taxes and so on, they tend to be denominated in silver tael or liang, the silver size C, which inside China was privately minted. It wasn't uniform. There was enormous variation in weight, size, and fineness. It was very difficult to transport because very large. It was usually, or was mainly used in large transactions. It couldn't be subdivided. There was no fractionary coinage out of it, which implied high transaction cost as the Chinese economy became more and more commercialized. Alongside the silver tael, there was the copper cash, or the copper coinage, that was minted by provincial mints under imperial license. It was used in small transactions. It was prone to debasement and forgery, and every rebellion tried and minted their own copper coin. That gives way to a multiplicity of copper coins in circulation. That makes either copper a good standard for a currency system inside China. On that token, literature has assumed that China performed in a very metallic system. And I'm very doubtful about that. This idea we've heard yesterday of the sort of customary rate of 1,000 copper cash coins, yuan, to a silver liang or tael. Liang is a unit of weight as well. But we need to make the distinction between unit of account and means of payment, and that happens inside China as silver is concerned. And it's important that in China there was a mintage of copper but not of silver, and that gave way to what Kuroda has nicely explained as multiplicity of means of payments and complementary monies, together with this imaginary unit that is the silver tael that we see here and there. Something that is, comparable to many other early modern monetary systems. Spain, for one, has a comparable system with multiple monies and a monetary, what is called imaginary unit or a unit of account for bookkeeping purposes. Now, what is interesting in the monetary history of China, that is between 1829 and 1860s, there is what is called in Chinese history this Dao-Wang depression, that is followed by the copper inflation. So if this is a bimetallic system, there are like somehow contradictory monetary events taking place. And that's what prompted me to sort of do research on this. What we have here is a very compressed, and as Helen explained yesterday, average trend of the exchange rate copper to silver in China, and Helen showed very nicely how this comes from Wang Huolin book that averages somehow different rates for silver copper exchange rate that were very different within China. That's easier. That is the customary rate, the 1,000 yuan per silver tael. It's interesting that throughout the 18th century, the exchange rate was below par, kind of steadily around 800. That is the period of the Dao-Wang depression, where this exchange rate copper to silver skyrockets, and followed by the Xianxing inflation, or the massive debasement of the copper coinage in the late 1850s, 60s into the 70s, in which this is explained traditionally by the outflow of silver because of the opium excess of opium imports, and particularly this peak here is explained by the debasement of the copper coinage for fiscal needs of the following emperor. So these are kind of contradictory trend. So I decided to sort of put together the data about silver and silver imports into China, exports outside Spanish America, and the intermediaries. And again, as a summary, we know that in the 17th century, Japan was the main provider of silver to China up to the 1680s, and something which is, you can see there, this is aggregated data for like a decade period, and that is somehow the progression. In the 18th century, and this is the data that comes from the East India Company records and some French sources, that is the time span in which the English East India Company nearly intermediated the Western trade with China. These are 7 years period. That is the data from Dermigny's fantastic thesis on Canton trade. And you see there, for 7-year period, the volume, the total tonnage, amount of silver in tons that arrived into China. The gray column on the right-hand side is the share that was intermediated by the British, and the yellow column is the share that was intermediated by the North American. North America said by then, by 1833, they were still getting their hands on, about Ohio and the Mississippi. That is, they were even not dreaming of silver mines ores that they found in Nevada or California later on. But what is clear, and that's something that has been missing from the picture, is that from the 1780s on, the North Americans are the main intermediaries of silver, not just to China, but to the whole of Asia. In kind of a summary, or in total, we could say that in the 17th century, as for registered imports of silver into China, this is about 4,700 tons, which, increased by 50%, if you wish, in the following century to 6,251 tons. Yeah? We'll compare this with the volume of silver minted in Spanish America, not just produced, in a moment. But it is important to make distinctions about what silver was in Spanish America. And this is the very famous piece of 8, a coin that was minted from the 16th and into the 18th century. And as for Michael, this is the specification of the fineness, yeah? And I hope you can see this better. It's very well known, and if you haven't seen it, you can see, it's in this sort of Pirates movie, and Johnny Depp will explain you about the piece of 8. From 1728-32, the mints in the Spanish Empire started cutting the coin with mechanical means, whereas the other one was the curved dollar because it was hammered. Yeah. With that, a very interesting additions and improvements happened to the coin. There's a slight debasement, about 6%. There you have the specification there. But very importantly, now is rimmed, yeah, which makes the clipping and the forgery much more difficult. These are the names by which was known in China. These are two, hopefully you see that, these are 2 pillar dollars from 1771, and I guess that they look pretty similar. But one was minted in Mexico City, and this one was minted in Lima, and they are technically identical. And this is the most famous silver coin of all, is Carolos, which was minted from 1772 into the 1800s, depending the fate of the region in which the mint was located. At that point, there were 5 mints in Spanish America that they produced the very same coin. This is called as the Buddha dollar, or the head or the bust dollar, and has the face of either Charles III or Charles IV. And what you see there, these are the Chinese chops. That's the way to attest that that was a good coin. These are chops, Chinese chops. And because this was very apparent for the Chinese, there were manuals that would explain the features and the characteristics of the coins, or even they would list the chops as chops were identifying the merchant or the money dealer that had dealt with the coin. Back to the volumes. That is only for Mexico. The volume of Spanish American silver not just produced or mined, but minted. And for the three types of coins, I would just like to call your attention to the last one, the Carolus, minted from 1772 to 1802, 1804, that amounted to 23,000 tons of silver. Remember that China imported 6,000 tons of silver in the whole of the 18th century, and Mexico only in 36 years produced 4 times more silver. And not to count the coinage in Peru, Santiago de Chile, Lima, Potosí, Santiago de Chile, Popayán, and Bogotá in Nueva Granada, or Guatemala, depending the period of time. I mean, that is just for you to have a glimpse. There was plenty of silver in the international economy, or in the international market as it was known. This mystifying feature that really puzzled very many visitors, travelers, and merchants about the unaccountable caprice that the Chinese had about that coin. Yeah, they wanted that coin, the Carolus coin, a coin that in China was officially in the very early on, in the 1730s or 40s for the pillar dollar, in the ledgers of the East India Company and for customs purposes in Canton, was taken as a proportion of what was the Canton tile at 7 maize, 2 kanda rings, throughout the 18th century, or 73% of the liang, the sort of imaginary unit of 100% pure silver. That was the Guangdong tile. This coin was taken as a sort of 73% of that. It became what Mio Kishimoto has explained for private transactions and even contracts within China as the 70% custom, or 70% cash custom, this unit of account for transactions. That is, it increasingly became a standard of value for prices, and as far as I've seen, at least since the 1790s. It appears in commercial transactions, in forward-looking contracts, and as far as I've seen, by the 1850s, this coin or the standard of value is current in most of southern China and some part of North China. And these chopped coins, we will talk about this if you are curious later, it's also current in the sort of more southern regions and where the ports are, like Fujian, Jiangxi, and Guangdong. Morse says very clearly there is a very simple explanation for why this was so. The reason for the wide acceptance of that coin is because an individual objects to carrying around in his pocket a 4-pound lump of silver which he cannot subdivide, and he equally objects to carrying 6 pounds worth of copper as the only fractional money. That coin, this coin made of silver, of Spanish American silver, shipped on either British, Dutch, Portuguese, or mainly North American ships to China, became familiar, reliable, and very convenient for the Chinese, because it lowered transaction costs. This is the evidence for the appreciation of the silver coin in China. That comes from this handbook on exchange rates, which averages private transactions from commercial reports or media, and that graph shows the premium in this case, or the differential in the exchange rate of that coin to sterling in Canton. That is, if you would have one of these coins, you'd rather take it to Canton, where you would have 30% over the exchange rate you would have fetched in London. And that is consistent with the flow of sort of the import of silver and the stability of the copper-silver exchange rate in the 18th century. This is 30% premium on this coin when traded in Canton, and that is in sterling, yeah. And this falls when that silver coin is becoming more and more scarce, but still remains 10% above par to sterling in Canton vis-a-vis London. So there is a huge arbitrage here to be made. Particularly, as London become the financial center and we are walking into the establishment of the gold standard, this silver peso was valued worth about 4 shillings or 4 shillings 2 pence in London. Yeah, that's about 50 pence, 50 pence. In China, by 1808, it's about 64 pence and rising. And so is in India as well, I found. Into sort of the first 30 years of the 19th century, there is about 15-20% premium for this coin in sterling if you take it to India. That poses a small theoretical problem to monetary historians of China, and that is, China did not coin silver. Silver and coin are not the same thing. They are not interchangeable, yeah? If the value of the coin falls below the intrinsic value, anywhere else, the owners will take it to the mint. They would melt it down into bullion, which most of money lenders and power brokers did in China. But if the value of the coin goes above the intrinsic value, unlike everywhere else, in China, the owners couldn't take it to the mint and produce coins, because the coin that they wanted was an imported coin, yeah? There was no monetary sovereignty in China as far as silver is concerned. The government couldn't extract, the imperial government or the local government, provincial governments couldn't extract any seigniorage on that, and they were reliant on an imported coin. In fact, China was dollarized, as Argentina today. A quasi-dollarization was completely dependent on an imported coin on which production, even trade, China had no say. And that coin ceased to be minted by 1808. And that explains the increase in the exchange rate of that particular coin inside China. Yeah, and here you have some observations from private transactions. Certainly, there is no trend, there's still a lot of research to be done, but it's clear that this exchange rate rises from the 1820s, 30s, and by the 1850s is about 50% premium with the sterling. Yeah, and that is at the peak of the Taiping Rebellion in December 1866. By the 1850s, Mexico has managed to establish a standard, stable, acceptable coin, the Mexican peso, that is not yet well received and is traded 50% discount to this Carolo that is becoming more and more a unit of account because there is not physically available. But the same happens with silver SIC, not just with the sterling. Remember that, it was initially taken at 73% of the Guangdong tael, yeah? Now, from 1790s, it's taken at par with silver size C, despite a much lower intrinsic content. And it traded at premium with size C from the 1811, 1810 onwards, yeah? Another room for arbitrage. You trade coins and you take silver size C and you catch an interesting premium. And that premium, somehow evolves in the same fashion with the premium with the sterling as the situation in China worsens. That's why I call this coin a Trojan horse. It's like a Trojano in a system. This coin became scarce and scarcer by the 1820s. Because it ceased to be minted, it becomes more and more scarce in the international economy, international trade. And moreover, it becomes mixed with other coins that they are of lower quantity or quality of silver or quality, but eventually are rejected by the Chinese. There are all sort of forfeits inside China even, and that challenges the faith on the Carolos, the standard coin, which adds further pressure on the exchange rate. And the bad coins, the Dutch Stuyver or any other silver coin, would disappear, would be melted, yeah? And that has no relation with the silver content per se, because here we are already performing with silver coins that they are mainly fiat money. The old coin, this chopped coin, mainly the sort of republican coins, that they might have the face of the king, but very different size or purity, they tend to be chopped and end up in India or Southeast Asia. And in India, the gold was returned for the opium. And the good one, the Carolos, they will be hoarded. With that, the velocity of circulation for that particular coin, that is the standard unit, the standard coin for many transactions in important part of China, particularly the export-producing regions, it would fall. And with the reduction in the velocity of circulation, the demand for money would fall. And there you have the so-called that recession or depression. Now, the premium on that coin increases, yeah, as the coinage becomes more and more scarce. It's like really a race to the bottom. And that explains the deflation in silver prices, but not the inflation in copper. Because the Carolos are value over the intrinsic value, and size C leaves China, given this possible arbitrage after the 1820s, that goes to Bengal for opium. I wonder if opium is really the culprit of the China's desilverization. We can discuss this later. That puts pressure on the copper cash. And unsurprisingly, all kind of, local authorities with the capacity to coin copper or mint copper would do so. And this greater demand on any monetary instrument explains the further coinage of copper that happens in larger denomination coins, in copper-denominated paper money, iron coinage, or any kind of means of payment are produced about that time, and that, I argue, explains the copper cash inflation that happened at the same time. That, I think, somehow explains how the particular demand for that particular coin inside China, and the fate of the Spanish peso that is no longer, or is ceased to be minted from the 1810s or 1800s on, becomes like a Trojan horse for the Chinese economy, in which you would have this double problem of a silver deflation and a copper inflation that presumably are unrelated, but should have very significant impact, not least in the tax incidence, as we were talking yesterday. That's it.
Thank you very much.